Welcome back with me, Melissa Ong. As 2026 unfolds, Malaysia finds itself at an important moment in its economic journey. Now, around the world, economies are adjusting to slower growth, shifting supply chains, and new geopolitical pressures. And Malaysia is responding with a major fiscal reset while also expanding its role on the global stage. To help us understand what this moment means for the country's direction and also resilience, we are joined by Associate Professor Dr. TRICIA from the School of Politics, International Relations and Economics at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Dr. TRICIA, thanks for doing this. Now, Malaysia is moving away from blanket subsidies. Now, instead of everyone getting the same support, help will go mainly to people who need it the most, like lower income households. Now, will this make Malaysia look more responsible with money and more attractive to investors? Let's begin with this.
Thank you so much for having me. So I think at the outset, if you look at the whole of the 2025 year, it was actually quite positive in the sense that the Malaysian government did make a lot of inroads into reducing its subsidies, primarily in the sector of diesel and petrol. This was always a very difficult piece of reform to get through. Many successive governments have tried but failed. So in that regard, I think it's kudos to the government for being able to do that and also stomach the potential political fallout that comes through from that. When any country undertakes these sort of fiscal reforms, there's investor confidence, there's assurance that these reforms will ultimately strengthen Malaysia's fiscal position to become more resilient. I think there are some ways to go, and in fact, just of course on the back of the current Iran war, where we know that oil prices are rising and continuing to be increased because of the shortfall that we're seeing in the global supply. This will also impact on Malaysia's ability to carry on its fiscal reforms throughout this year, right? So, for instance, the government still continues to plan to reduce subsidies even further. So how this will impact Malaysia, I think it's twofold. On the one hand, while higher oil prices would be actually better for us in the sense that we receive a lot of dividends from Petronas, our national oil company, therefore we will increase those revenues from that particular sector. Anything that's petroleum related, right, in the revenues that will see our budget increase. However, at the same time, this will also be offset by the subsidies of fuel. So as I just mentioned, we've already gone into reducing the subsidy on diesel and RON 95, particularly in the petrol, which means that when the global oil prices rise, the government will have to be paying more in order to maintain the controlled domestic prices. So I think these are things that we really need to look at. And I hope that the government will still have that kind of reform agenda despite the volatile situation overall.
There have been disagreements between the federal government and some state governments over oil and gas regulations. Investors, I believe, usually prefer clear and consistent rules. Now, how important is it for Malaysia to settle these differences and speak with one voice? Tricia.
Yeah, it's absolutely imperative, very, very important. We know that in the energy sector, while globally and also Malaysia, we are having these conversations about transitioning away from the oil and gas into renewables and more clean and green energy. However, we are still very reliant on oil and gas, right, for our revenue generation. So there's a very tricky transition period. Until we get there, we still need to be able to present a very coherent and cohesive story to our international investors. And the federal government and Petronas, of course, will stand to gain if it can work out compromise solutions with the state governments in a way that demonstrates cooperation and that these cooperations, are done hopefully internally. It doesn't spill over into the international scene. Ultimately, for instance, the biggest story at the moment will be that of between Petronas and Petros, which is the Sarawak oil and gas company. There's currently Both cases are being pursued at the federal court in terms of determining who has the ultimate jurisdiction, right? Which laws have jurisdiction over the oil and gas resources in Sarawak. Sarawak isn't the only state that's contesting this. There are other states that are also trying to push for more resource agency. Ultimately, it is both a legal but more so a political solution. So if the political leaders can come together to figure out a compromise, this will present Malaysia very well internationally, and failure to do that, of course, would have the opposite effect.
Now let's shift gears and talk about rare earth minerals which are used in things like electric cars, smartphones and also wind turbines. The demand for them is of course growing very quickly around the world. Now what should Malaysia start doing now if it wants to benefit from this industry, especially in the future?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, we just talked about the importance of aligning the federal and the state governments when it comes to policy matters over oil and gas, right? And here you have another type of resource which is gaining in great geopolitical terms because of the importance that the critical mineral sector holds for lots of different industries. And, you know, chiefly, of course, you're talking about medical technologies, you're talking about defense sector as well. And Malaysia does have rare earths, but in order to meet the world's growing demand and also to meet our own very ambitious goals of wanting to develop our midstream and downstream, we really need to align our public policy on several fronts. The federal state policy, because state governments control land and mining matters in Malaysia under the federal constitution, the federal government controls other areas like, you know, environmental, nuclear or radioactive waste. There are also some other joint matters which have also got to do with the environmental impact. Whatever the case, they need to be able to align this so that any foreign investors or countries that are intending to come into Malaysia to work together with our local market and with our local government will be able to see that Malaysia is presenting a common front, right? A common voice. And then, of course, the other thing that currently we have is a rare earth export ban. And I think that is it's a measure intended to develop again our rare earth industry. However, we also need to ensure that this ban will ultimately benefit our industry in the long run. So conversations need to happen with stakeholders, with the private sector, especially those actual companies who are going to be thinking of exploring mining, because if you don't align all these things, then we will actually never achieve our plan to make full use of our rare earth sector. But however, I also have to mention that we have to do this in a paced manner to ensure that our environmental impact is not detrimental as well.
Well said, Tricia. And also, despite what is happening globally, Malaysia and the United States are strengthening trade ties that could mean more opportunities for Malaysian technology companies and also exporters. Where could Malaysian businesses see the biggest gains from this? Your perspective?
Yeah, so of course, we understand that there was the recently signed US-Malaysia Agreement on Reciprocal Trade, the ART, and despite the fact that the Supreme Court in the United States has struck down Trump's tariffs, I believe that Trump is, and this is an unfolding story as we speak, right? Trump will continue to pursue other avenues and other pieces of legislation to get those tariffs in place still. So whatever the case, I mean, I know that there are various critics and positions on this matter, but Malaysia will still want to gain access to the US market. US overtook China as Malaysia's largest export market in 2025 last year. And there have been approved foreign investments from the US, which surged about 47.5% year on year. The kinds of investments that we have attracted from the US include renewable energy, semiconductors, advanced mineral processing. So I think ultimately, whatever happens with the court situation and the US tariffs under Trump, Malaysia will still have to bite the bullet and be able to negotiate flexibly with whichever powers that be, whether it comes from the global north or the global south.
Right, and also a follow-up question. Now, Malaysia works with both the United States and countries in the BRICS group. Now, not many countries have strong ties with both sides. How can Malaysia then use that position to its advantage in today's global economy?
Yes, so I think Malaysia has been actually gifted with a very unique position. It was one of the earliest countries that promoted and promulgated the non-aligned movement, which was signed in Bandung years ago, the NAM. So since then, and given Malaysia's very strategic political and geo-economic positioning in the region, like where we actually sit physically, geographically, we really stand to gain from any of these tensions that continue to spill over. We need to be able to leverage our neutrality, as mentioned. We need to be able to be that kind of stabilizing economic bridge given the current global climate. We don't know what will happen in the future. There's, of course, a lot of talk about whether we're moving into a world of multipolarity. Whether that eventually comes through will really depend on history as it unfolds now. So I do believe that neutrality and strong multilateral relationships is one thing, which Malaysia already has an abundance of. But it also has to be able to translate these relationships into actual concrete development projects. So for instance, whether or not we are able to broker partnership deals, funding, and support from both sources, right? Whether it's from the US or BRICS, as you mentioned, Global South, like these alternative development partner sources. I think that will be key. And beyond this as well, right? So I think we shouldn't also exclude partnerships to just these narrow, it has to be US, North America, or BRICS. There are many, many other regional blocs, regional groupings that now Malaysia has not only pursued, but we have also been pursued by others in Europe, in Latin America, South America, for instance. So if we can also aim to facilitate trade on a more B2B basis with these new markets. So the government's role will be important. Government's role will be to facilitate, to ensure that there's more exposure and opportunities to be made available. But ultimately, we also hope that there are pre-existing multilateral trade agreements which Malaysia has signed, such as the CPTPP, and RCEP also exists. Making use of these agreements, and we're also negotiating with the EU to conclude finally the Malaysia-EU FTA, making use of these platforms as ways to open up spaces, right? So we need to be able to think outside the box and transcend these polarities that are emerging in the world today. And that's how I believe that we can take full advantage of this current climate today.
That's for sure. We need to think outside the box. Thank you, TRICIA, for weighing in today.
Thank you.